In the center of the restaurant, glowing with New Year's Eve decorations, Marcus Webb quietly slipped a small cake before his son Liam during his brief break at 8:30. Father and son lit a single candle, humming softly as though hiding the entire world in that moment. At table 11 by the window, Caroline Fletcher, the CEO, who always dined in silence, suddenly froze her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. For the first time in 10 years, she saw what belonging truly looked like, and she whispered, her voice trembling inside her chest where no one could hear, "I want that." Riverside Bistro had stood on the east side of Portland since 1978, a cornerstone establishment where old brick walls met floor-to-ceiling windows of new glass. It had weathered recessions and renovations, maintaining its reputation as the place where families came for occasions that mattered. On New Year's Eve, it transformed into something that belonged in a snow globe, the kind tourists bought and never shook because the magic seemed too fragile to disturb. Garlands of gold and silver draped across exposed wooden beams, filling the air with metallic shimmer, and the faint scent of champagne already being uncorked in the kitchen. White candles flickered on every table, their flames reflected in polished silverware and crystal glasses borrowed from the upscale supplier 3 blocks away. The pianist in the corner, an elderly man named Vincent, who had played here for 23 years, moved through Auld Lang Syne with the kind of reverence that made even the busiest servers pause mid-stride their trays, balanced their rushing, stilled by muscle memory of beauty they'd heard 1,000 times but never stopped hearing. The dining room was full to capacity. Couples crowded around intimate tables for 2, leaning, close hands intertwined, making promises about the year ahead that some would keep and others would forget by February. Groups of friends occupied the larger booths, raising glasses of wine that caught the candlelight like amber, toasting to health and happiness. And the blessing of another year survived. Laughter rose and fell in waves that crashed against the brick walls and rolled back, softer, warmer. The sound of silverware against porcelain created a rhythm that spoke of abundance, of celebration, of everything the season promised to those who had people to share it with. Conversations overlapped in a symphony of anticipation, women adjusting the straps of cocktail dresses purchased specifically for tonight. Men checking watches, calculating how many hours until midnight, until the countdown, until they could kiss someone and pretend the calendar turning meant something more than just another sunrise. Marcus Webb moved through this world like a shadow present, but unnoticed, essential, but invisible. At 36, he had worked at Riverside Bistro for 3 years. First as a server when he desperately needed any job that would let him support his son, then taking on maintenance work when the night manager, Ruth, discovered he could fix the broken espresso machine with nothing but a screwdriver. Patience and knowledge inherited from a father who had worked as a mechanic in Seattle before arthritis claimed his hands and then his life. Marcus wore the standard uniform black slacks purchased from the clearance rack at Target, where he checked the sale items at every other Thursday, and a white button-down shirt that he pressed himself every Sunday evening using the iron that had belonged to Catherine, his late wife, moving the metal across fabric in the same careful pattern she had taught him during their first month of marriage when they were both 22, and believed hard work equaled security. His hands were clean but rough, calloused across the palms with small scars mapping a history of minor repairs, the burn from touching a heating element he thought had cooled, the slice from a knife that slipped while he was cutting zip ties off a new shipment, the puncture from a nail he'd stepped on while fixing the back fence at their apartment building, because the landlord wouldn't send anyone for 3 weeks. The kind of hands that knew work intimately and had made peace with it, that could carry 4 plates without trembling, that could unclog a drain or rewire a light fixture, or hold his son during an asthma attack, without shaking even when terror filled every cell of his body. Tonight, like every New Year's Eve for the past 3 years, he had asked Ruth for permission to let Liam sit in the small alcove near the kitchen, that forgotten space between the bright dining room and the fluorescent chaos of the dish pit. The place where servers took their breaks and ate hurried meals standing up, where the air smelled of industrial soap and fryer oil. And underneath it all, the faint scent of hope that this shift would end soon, that tips would be good, that tomorrow might be easier. Ruth Brennan, the manager, a woman of 52 with 3 teenagers of her own and eyes that had witnessed too many single parents struggle, had looked at Marcus's face, the hope mixed with resignation, the expectation of rejection, softened by gratitude for whatever kindness might come, and simply nodded. She understood. Some things mattered more than policy. Some fathers deserved small mercies. Liam sat on a folding chair, his feet dangling 6 inches from the floor shoes that were slightly too big because Marcus had bought them a size up at the outlet mall so they would last through spring when he could justify the expense of new ones. The boy wore a paper party hat he had made himself at school during the last week, before winter break. Construction paper carefully folded and stapled, the elastic band cutting slightly into his chin. But he didn't adjust it because his father had said he looked handsome. And that was enough. In his lap, he held a small notebook with blue cover pages filled with drawings of rockets and stars and houses with smoke curling from chimneys, the kind of houses he saw on television but had never lived in, the kind with 2-car garages and basketball hoops in driveways and dogs that weren't banned by landlords who charged pet deposits Marcus couldn't afford. He was 7 years old and the kind of child who understood things without being told, who had learned before kindergarten that New Year's Eve at the restaurant meant his father could keep his job. That the small cake was enough, that love sometimes wore the uniform of sacrifice and late-night shifts and presents that came wrapped in newspaper, because wrapping paper cost $3 a roll and $3 bought a gallon of milk or a box of macaroni or 20 minutes of parking downtown when Liam had a doctor's appointment. He was small for his age, thin in a way that worried the school nurse, with dark hair like his father's, and hazel eyes behind glasses that were 2 prescriptions old because vision insurance didn't cover new lenses until April, and April was still 4 months away. The inhaler in his Pokemon backpack was his constant companion, the rattle of it, a sound Marcus heard in his sleep. Caroline Fletcher occupied table 11, the corner spot by the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the street where taxis and cars passed in streams of red and white light, headlights and taillights, painting the wet pavement in colors that looked festive from inside the warmth, but meant nothing to the people driving through the cold. She was 34 years old and had built an empire in commercial real estate, the kind of woman whose name appeared in the business section of the Portland Tribune above words like visionary and ruthless and unstoppable. At 28, she had purchased her first building with a loan that would have crushed most people, that had crushed her for 2 years until she learned to stop sleeping and start calculating. At 30, she had turned that building into 5. Now she owned 9 properties across the Pacific Northwest, each one managed with the same cold efficiency that had made her successful and utterly alone. She came to Riverside Bistro 3 times a week, always alone, always ordering the same thing, grilled salmon with no sauce, because she did not trust rich food after years of eating meals from her desk at midnight, when the office was empty and no one could see her cry over spreadsheets. Steamed vegetables cut into uniform pieces, a single glass of Chardonnay that she sipped exactly 3 times before abandoning the wine warming to room temperature while she pushed food around her plate and pretended she had an appetite. The servers knew not to make small talk. Ruth knew to seat her away from families, away from celebrations, away from anything that might remind her of what she did not have. Tonight she wore a charcoal cashmere sweater that had cost $800, but felt like any other sweater, and pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, one of the few people who had loved her without conditions, who had died when Caroline was 14, and left behind a silence that still echoed in every empty room of her penthouse. Her table was set for one. It was always set for one, a single napkin folded into the shape of a swan, a single water glass perspiring gently in the warm room, A single menu that she never opened because she always ordered the same thing, as if variety might introduce chaos into a life built on control and predictability. And the desperate belief that if she could just manage everything perfectly, the loneliness might not hurt as much. The restaurant breathed with warmth and noise and the complicated beauty of human connection. At table 4, a young couple celebrated their engagement, the diamond on her finger catching the candlelight and throwing tiny rainbows across the tablecloth while he watched her face instead of the ring, because that's where the real light was. At table 9, a group of college friends reunited after years apart, talking over each other in the way people do when they have so much to say and so little time, when friendship feels like coming home. At table 12, an elderly couple held hands across the holly-embroidered tablecloth, their fingers intertwined like roots grown together over decades, wedding rings worn smooth by time and devotion and the simple act of holding on. The contrast was stark enough to hurt. One room, two worlds existing in parallel dimensions that never touched. Tables filled with noise and light and belonging, where people laughed too loud and talked with their mouths full and reached across plates to steal French fries from each other, because that was what intimacy meant, what trust looked like in its most casual form. And then table 11, where Caroline Fletcher cut her salmon into precise 1-inch squares and chewed each bite exactly 20 times, a habit she had developed at boarding school, when eating was just another task to complete efficiently. When dining halls were places to survive rather than enjoy, when she had learned that if you ate quickly enough and kept your eyes down, you could leave before anyone noticed you were alone. Marcus's break came at 8:30, right between the dinner rush when the kitchen moved like a machine, and the late crowd who would arrive after theater performances and holiday parties ended wanting dessert and coffee and a place to wait out the final hours until midnight. He had 45 minutes before he would need to be back on the floor, clearing tables and refilling water glasses and answering questions about tomorrow's brunch special that he had answered 200 times already. He walked to the alcove where Liam waited, carrying the small white bakery box he had picked up on the way to work, stopping at Save Mart on Division Street, where they marked down day-old items at 5 in the evening. Inside was a cupcake from the clearance rack, chocolate with vanilla frosting reduced from $4 to $1.75 because the frosting had smeared slightly during the day, creating a small imperfection that made it unsellable at full price, but perfectly fine for a 7-year-old boy who would not care if the swirl was crooked, who had never tasted the expensive version and therefore had no comparison, no sense of what he was missing. Marcus had smoothed the frosting as best he could with the back of a plastic knife from the break room, trying to make it look intentional, like he had chosen this design specifically, like it was an artistic choice rather than a financial necessity. Now, he set it before his son, like it was something precious, like it was a layered cake from the French bakery downtown where a single slice cost more than Marcus's hourly wage, and people waited in line for 40 minutes just to say they'd been there. From his pocket, he produced a single birthday candle, white and thin, the kind that came in a package of 50 for $2 at the grocery store, the kind he bought once a year and rationed for small celebrations. Liam's actual birthday in March and New Year's Eve, and sometimes on Fridays when the week had been particularly brutal, and they both needed a reminder that small joys still existed in a world that often felt designed to crush them. Liam looked up at his father, his eyes the same hazel as Marcus's, the same eyes that had belonged to Marcus's own mother, who had died when he was 12, held something ancient and young, at the same time a wisdom that came from watching his father work until exhaustion became baseline, mixed with the innocence of a child who still believed that goodness would be rewarded, that hard work mattered, that they would be okay. The boy's voice barely rose above the distant clatter of dishes and the muffled sounds of celebration from the dining room. "Is it okay to do this here?" Marcus struck a match from a book he had taken from the bar, the kind with the restaurant's logo printed on the front in gold script. The match hissed to life, sulfur sharp in his nostrils, a smell he associated with every birthday, every small ceremony they had created from necessity and hope. He cupped his hand around the flame to shield it from the draft that came from the kitchen door, swinging open and closed, as servers rushed between worlds, the world of plenty where customers complained if their water glasses sat empty for 90 seconds, and the world of scarcity where the dishwashers shared one cigarette during their break because a full pack cost $10 they couldn't spare. He touched the match to the wick. The candle caught burning steady and bright, a single point of light in the dim alcove that smelled of industrial soap and fryer oil, and underneath it all the faint scent of vanilla from someone's discarded dessert. They sat together in that small space between the kitchen and the dining room, between the clatter of dishes being washed by men who spoke Spanish and laughed at jokes Marcus did not understand, and the murmur of satisfied customers who would leave generous tips because New Year's Eve made people feel wealthy, even when they were not made them remember what it felt like to be grateful. Liam began to hum Auld Lang Syne under his breath, mimicking Vincent's piano from the dining room, a sound so soft it might have been mistaken for the building settling, or the hum of the industrial refrigerator in the back. Marcus hummed along, his voice slightly off-key, but earnest, the way fathers sing when they don't care about being good, only about being present. For 3 minutes and 40 seconds, they existed in a bubble of their own, making a private world where poverty did not matter because they had each other, where a 175 cupcake tasted like a feast because it was shared with love, where the future was just this moment, and this moment was enough. The boy's voice came small and careful, fragile as spun glass. "Dad, I'm sorry we can't go home and have a big party like other families." Marcus reached across the small plastic table and took his son's hand. The boy's fingers were cold despite the warmth of the restaurant, always cold because he was too small to generate enough body heat, because the winter coat Marcus had bought him from the thrift store was serviceable but not perfect, good enough to keep him from freezing but not good enough to keep him truly warm. Marcus's throat tightened with the familiar ache of wanting to give his son the world and having only a cupcake to offer. Only these stolen moments in a service alcove. Only the promise that love could be enough when everything else fell short. His voice came rough with emotion he tried to hide. "Liam, listen to me. You are my family. Sitting here with you is the best New Year's I could ask for." The boy's eyes dropped to the table, to the candle flame dancing in the draft. "But I didn't get you anything. All the other kids at school were talking about the presents they bought their parents. Timothy got his mom a necklace. Sarah made her dad a picture frame. I didn't have money for anything." Marcus squeezed his son's hand gently, carefully, the way you hold something precious that might break. "You're here. That's everything. You know what the best present is, having someone who wants to spend time with you. Everything else is just stuff, just things that break or get lost or stop mattering. You are the gift, Liam. You always have been." The boy smiled, then small and certain, the kind of smile that came from a deep well of trust that had never been betrayed, that Marcus protected more fiercely than anything else in his life. Liam leaned forward, closed his eyes for 3 full seconds, like he was making a wish he truly believed would come true, lips moving in a silent prayer to whatever forces governed the universe and decided who got happy endings, and blew out the candle. The smoke curled upward in a thin ribbon, disappearing into the restaurant's warm air, carrying whatever hope a 7-year-old boy had whispered into the darkness. Hope for a new nebulizer, because the old one rattled and scared him. Hope that his father would find work he enjoyed. Hope that they could stay in their apartment. Hope that the sad lady at table 11 would find a friend. From table 11, Caroline Fletcher watched it all. She had not meant to. She had been cutting another piece of salmon when the small movement in her peripheral vision caught her attention. A man and a boy huddled over something tiny, a candle flame. A song hummed so quietly she could not make out the melody, but could feel the tenderness in the silence between notes. The joy on the child's face when he blew out the flame. The way the man's shoulders relaxed, just for a moment, as if he had given his son the world when he had only given a cupcake and 45 minutes of time. Something in Caroline's chest cracked not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet inevitability of ice breaking on a frozen lake when spring first arrives, when the temperature rises just enough that what seemed solid reveals itself to have been fragile all along. She set down her fork, the salmon suddenly tasteless, the vegetables suddenly impossible to swallow, past the tightness in her throat. She could not remember the last time she had attended a real celebration. Not a business dinner where deals were made over dessert. Not a charity gala where she wrote checks and left before the dancing started because watching couples sway together hurt too much. But an actual celebration where people meant what they said when they clinked glasses, where the joy was genuine rather than performed. Her parents had divorced when she was 6, the kind of divorce that was civilized and cruel where lawyers handled everything and the child became another asset to be divided. Her father remarried within a year and started a new family, 2 sons who played soccer and got straight A's and never made him feel like fatherhood was a burden. Her mother moved to Paris and sent birthday cards that arrived 3 weeks late with checks that increased in value as Caroline grew older, as if money could replace presents, as if a bigger number on a slip of paper could make up for missed recitals and forgotten holidays, and the slow death of hope that she might matter to someone. Caroline had learned early that achievement was something you could control, something that had rules and metrics and clear outcomes. Success made sense. Work 80 hours and you got promoted. Buy low and sell high and you made money. Loneliness just was shapeless and endless and resistant to every strategy she employed to fix it. But watching that father and son, Caroline felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a decade: envy. Not for money or status, she had those things, had built an empire, had exceeded every goal her business school professors had set. No. This was envy for the simple fact of being wanted, of having someone wait for you, of mattering in a way that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or shareholder value or the number of properties your company owned. She lifted her hand, the gesture automatic, trained by years of summoning service. The server, a young woman named Claire, who had worked here for 2 years and dreamed of saving enough to attend culinary school, appeared instantly, her smile professional but genuine, because she liked Caroline, despite the coldness, despite the tips that were always exactly 18%, no more and no less. Claire's voice was soft, deferential. "Yes, Miss Fletcher." Caroline nodded toward the alcove, toward the man and boy in their private world. "That man, is he a guest?" Claire followed her gaze, her expression shifting to something gentler, something that recognized the question beneath the question. "That's Marcus. He works here, server and maintenance. That's his son Liam." Caroline's hand went to her wine glass. She did not drink. She set it down the stem, leaving a ring of condensation on the white tablecloth. "Does he often bring his son to work?" The server's voice carried a note of sympathy that Caroline didn't understand, didn't know was directed at her rather than Marcus. "Only on holidays. He's a single dad, can't afford a sitter, I think. Ruth lets him as long as the boy stays out of the way." Caroline nodded slowly, her mind processing information that should have been simple but felt complicated, weighted with implications she couldn't quite name. She looked at her plate, at the salmon she had paid $38 for and barely touched. Half remained growing cold, congealing in its own juices. She had no appetite. For 10 years she had eaten New Year's dinner alone in this restaurant because it was open, because it was neutral territory, because going home to her empty penthouse apartment felt worse than sitting among strangers who at least filled the space with noise and life. She had told herself it was a choice, that she preferred solitude, that relationships were messy and inefficient and not worth the risk of disappointment. Now, watching a man who had so little create something so whole, she understood it had been a lie. The kind of lie people tell themselves when the truth is too painful to bear. When admitting loneliness means admitting failure, means acknowledging that all the success in the world cannot fill the hole where connection should be. She stood. The movement was sudden enough that Claire stepped back, surprise flickering across her face before professionalism smoothed it away. The server's voice carried a thread of concern. "Miss Fletcher, is everything all right?" Caroline's voice came steadier than she felt. "I need to speak with him, with Marcus." Claire's expression shifted to confusion, then hurriness. "Did he do something wrong because Marcus is one of our best?" Her words cut through more firmly than intended. "No, nothing wrong." She crossed the dining room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor in a rhythm that felt too loud, too deliberate, announcing her approach to anyone paying attention. Conversations did not pause. She was not famous in the way actors or athletes were famous, but a few heads turned because people always noticed when someone in $800 cashmere walked toward the service areas, when wealth ventured into spaces usually reserved for those who served it. She was aware of her own strangeness, aware that she was crossing an invisible line that separated her world from Marcus's, aware that this could go terribly wrong, but unable to stop herself because the ache in her chest had become unbearable, and she needed something, anything, to make it stop. Marcus looked up as her shadow fell across the alcove. He was in the process of putting the candle back in his pocket, his movements careful, economical, the gesture of someone who wasted nothing, because everything had value. Liam held the cupcake in both hands, careful not to smudge the frosting Marcus had smoothed. Careful, because he understood that this small thing was important, that his father had tried to make it perfect. For a moment, Marcus's face showed confusion, then worry, the automatic response of someone who had learned that when people from the dining room approached him, it usually meant a complaint, a problem, something he had done wrong or failed to do right. He stood quickly, his body moving between Caroline and Liam in a gesture so subtle she almost missed it. So instinctive, it spoke of years spent protecting his son from a world that could be cruel. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" Caroline stopped 3 feet away, suddenly uncertain, suddenly aware that she had no plan, no script, no idea what words could possibly bridge the distance between her life and his. Up close, she could see the wear in his shirt collar, the careful way it had been mended with stitches so small and even, they must have taken 30 minutes to complete. She could see the tiredness around his eyes, not the tiredness of one late night, but the exhaustion of years of too many double shifts, of too many hours spent worrying about money and health insurance, and whether his son's shoes would last another month. She could see the strength in his hands, the competence in the way he stood, the dignity that poverty had not erased. She opened her mouth to speak and found that the words she had prepared, something polite and distant, something that would preserve her armor, would not come. Instead, what emerged was raw and unguarded. "Are you celebrating New Year's?" Liam looked at his father, then at the woman in the expensive sweater who stood in their alcove like she had wandered in from another planet. He nodded, the paper hat bobbing on his head, and his voice came out in the careful tone children use when speaking to adults they don't know. "Yes, ma'am." Something in the child's formality, in the way he called her ma'am, like he had been taught to respect adults even when adults had done nothing to earn that respect, undid Caroline completely. She felt her eyes sting, felt tears threatening, and blinked rapidly because she did not cry in public, had not cried in front of another person since her grandmother's funeral 20 years ago, when she had learned that grief was something you handled alone. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "It looks lovely." Marcus's posture relaxed slightly, his protective stance easing just enough that she could see his confusion, giving way to something else, maybe curiosity, maybe pity. She couldn't tell. "Thank you. We were just finishing up." Caroline looked at the cupcake, at the candle smoke still dissipating in the air, at the notebook with its drawings of houses this child would probably never live in, and felt the weight of her own life. The penthouse with 3 bedrooms she never used, the car that cost more than most people's annual salary, the bank account that grew larger every month while her contact list grew smaller. The words came out before she could stop them, halting, and practiced the verbal equivalent of stumbling in the dark. "I don't mean to intrude, but I was wondering—" She stopped, swallowed, tried again. "Would it be all right if I joined you?" Marcus stared at her. Liam tilted his head, the paper hat shifting to one side, his child's mind trying to process why the sad lady from table 11 was standing in their alcove asking questions that didn't make sense. Marcus's voice came slow, careful, testing the words. "Join us." Caroline's heart hammered against her ribs, panic rising because this was a mistake. Obviously a mistake. What was she thinking? She should leave, should go back to table 11 and finish her salmon and pretend this never happened. "For New Year's, I don't have anyone to celebrate with, and you both looked so happy, I just thought—" She stopped again, the sentence dying in her throat because she could hear how it sounded, how pathetic and desperate and wrong. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, this is inappropriate. Forget I asked." She turned to leave, already calculating the fastest route back to her table, already planning how she would signal Claire for the check and leave before Marcus could tell anyone about this humiliation. But Liam spoke up, his voice clear and certain in a way that only children could manage, uncontaminated by adult cynicism or social calculation. "You can sit with us. We have an extra chair." Caroline looked at the boy, at his small hand, pointing to a third folding chair leaning against the wall, at his expression that was open and kind in a way the world had not yet taught him to guard. He smiled at her the way children smile before life teaches them to be suspicious, before they learn that kindness can be weaponized, before they understand that some people don't deserve grace. Marcus glanced at his son, then at Caroline, and she watched something shift in his face. He saw something she didn't know what, couldn't name it, but whatever he recognized in her expression made his voice soften. "It's not much, but you're welcome to join us." Caroline's breath caught. Marcus unfolded the third chair, the metal scraping against the floor, and the sound seemed impossibly loud in the small space. Caroline sat down, her cashmere sweater and pearl earrings suddenly absurd in this alcove that smelled of dish soap and hope. The plastic table between them could barely hold the cupcake and Liam's notebook, and with 3 people their knees nearly touched. But Caroline sat as if it were the finest seat she had ever occupied, as if this folding chair in a service alcove mattered more than every boardroom chair she had claimed, every first-class airline seat she had occupied, every designer sofa in her empty penthouse. Liam pushed the cupcake toward her, his small hands careful with the offering. "Would you like some?" Caroline's voice cracked. "I couldn't." "That's yours." The boy's response came with the simple wisdom of someone who had been taught well. "Dad says sharing makes things better." Caroline looked at Marcus. He shrugged, a small movement that said he had taught his son this because it was true, because in a life where they had so little, sharing was the only way to multiply joy. She carefully broke off a small piece of the cupcake, the frosting still sweet despite the discount, the cake still moist despite being a day old. She ate it slowly, and it tasted like something more than chocolate and vanilla, like something she had been searching for without knowing its name. Liam began to talk, his 7-year-old voice filling the alcove with stories about school, about the snowflake craft he made in art class that didn't look like anyone else's, but Mrs. Patterson said was creative, about the classroom hamster named Mr. Whiskers, who escaped and was found sleeping in the principal's inbox eating paperwork. Marcus sat quietly watching his son with the kind of attention that made it clear this child was the center of his universe, the sun around which everything else orbited. Caroline listened, asking questions that made Liam's face light up, laughing when he described how Mr. Whiskers had left tiny footprints across the vice principal's coffee-stained memos. For 20 minutes, Caroline Fletcher forgot that she was a CEO, forgot that she owned buildings in 7 states, Forgot that her calendar was booked 3 months in advance with meetings that would shape millions of dollars in transactions. She was just a woman sitting at a folding table with a father and son, eating a shared cupcake, listening to a 7-year-old boy talk about his life with the kind of enthusiasm that came from believing the world was basically good, that people were basically kind, that tomorrow would be better than today. Then someone recognized her. It happened quickly, inevitably, the way disasters unfold slowly at first and then all at once. A man from table 8 stood to use the restroom, walking past the alcove, and did a double take so pronounced it would have been comical if it weren't so terrible. His voice came loud enough to carry, loud enough to shatter the bubble. "Miss Fletcher, I thought that was you." Caroline looked up. She recognized him vaguely, an investor she had met at a conference, his name escaping her, but his face familiar in the way wealthy people's faces become familiar when you move in the same circles long enough. He beamed at her with the kind of aggressive friendliness that assumed intimacy where none existed. "Having dinner with the staff, that's very generous of you." The word generous hung in the air like an accusation, like a spotlight revealing something Caroline had wanted to keep hidden. Around them, other diners began to turn, whispers starting spreading like wildfire through dried grass. A few people pulled out their phones not to take pictures, but to search her name, to confirm who she was, to turn this private moment into public spectacle. Ruth appeared from the kitchen, her expression tight with concern, her experienced eyes reading the situation instantly and understanding that something precious was being destroyed. Marcus understood too. His face changed, confusion giving way to realization, giving way to something harder, something that looked like betrayal. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that cut through the murmurs. Caroline stood as well, her heart sinking because she could see it happening, could see the walls going up in his eyes, could see him calculating and arriving at conclusions that were wrong, but looked right from where he stood. His voice came out harder than he probably intended, anger mixing with hurt, mixing with humiliation. "Did you think this was amusing? Slumming it with the working class on New Year's Eve?" Caroline's voice emerged, desperate, pleading. "No, that's not—" Liam looked between them, confused and frightened by the sudden change in his father's tone, by the anger that had appeared from nowhere and filled the small space until there was no room left for anything else. Marcus's hands clenched at his sides, his whole body vibrating with barely controlled rage. Then what was it? A photo opportunity. A story you'll tell at your next board meeting about how you ate cupcakes with the poor people. Caroline felt her face crumple, felt everything she had hoped for in this moment, turning to ash. She reached for her purse, a practiced motion, the instinct to smooth things over with money, because that was what she knew, what she understood, the only language she spoke fluently. But Marcus's expression stopped her cold, because she could see that offering money now would be the final insult, would confirm every terrible thing he was thinking about her. His voice dropped lower, became quieter, which somehow made it more devastating. "I don't want your charity." Her response came fast, urgent. "I wasn't offering charity, I was asking for company." The words landed wrong, or maybe they landed exactly right, exposing the truth in a way that made it ugly. "It's the same thing when you're you and I'm me." Caroline looked at him, then at Liam, who had shrunk back in his chair, his paper hat now crumpled in his small fists, his face showing the kind of pain children feel when the adults they trust start fighting and the world stops making sense. She felt the entire restaurant watching, felt the weight of her own name, her own success, crushing the one genuine moment she had experienced in years. Her voice emerged as a whisper, broken and raw. "I'm sorry." Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the floor in that same deliberate rhythm, but now it sounded like retreat, like defeat, like everything good turning bad, because she had touched it with hands that only knew how to destroy. She did not return to table 11. She collected her coat from the hostess stand, threw $200 bills on the counter, far more than her meal cost, but she couldn't think clearly enough to calculate proper payment, and left through the front door into the freezing December night. The cold air hit her face like a slap, like punishment, like the universe confirming what she had always suspected, that she did not deserve warmth, did not deserve connection, did not deserve the simple grace of sitting with a father and son on New Year's Eve. She stood on the sidewalk, her breath misting in the streetlights, and realized she was crying. Not the careful, controlled tears of earlier but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she had locked away for decades, from the 6-year-old whose parents had chosen divorce over fighting for family, from the 14-year-old standing alone at her grandmother's grave, from the 34-year-old who had just experienced the closest thing to belonging she had felt in 20 years and watched it dissolve because she had been foolish enough to reach for it. Inside the restaurant, Marcus sat back down slowly, his anger draining away and leaving something worse in its wake. Shame mixed with confusion, mixed with the terrible suspicion that he had just made a catastrophic mistake. He put his head in his hands, elbows on the plastic table, and Liam's cupcake sat between them, like evidence of something ruined. Ruth appeared from nowhere, the way good managers do when disasters unfold. Her expression cautious as she approached the alcove that now felt contaminated by what had just happened. Her voice came soft, careful. "You okay?" Marcus didn't look up. "I'm fine." Ruth's silence said she didn't believe him, but she was wise enough not to push. "You want to take the rest of the night off, I can cover your section." The offer was genuine, and Marcus knew it came from kindness, but accepting it meant losing 4 hours of New Year's Eve wages, meant losing tips that could run $200 on a night like this, when people drank champagne and felt generous. "I need the hours." Ruth nodded and walked away, her footsteps fading into the kitchen noise. Liam tugged on his father's sleeve, his small fingers insistent, demanding attention that Marcus didn't want to give, because looking at his son meant seeing the confusion in those hazel eyes, meant confronting what he had done. "Dad, why did you yell at her?" Marcus lifted his head, forced himself to meet Liam's gaze. "I didn't yell." The boy's voice came firmer than expected, carrying a note of reproach that cut deeper than any adult criticism could. "You were mad." Marcus looked at his son, really looked, saw the hurt there, the disappointment, the way Liam was trying to understand why the world had suddenly turned cruel, when moments before it had been kind. He searched for words that could explain class and power and humiliation to a 7-year-old who still believed in fairness. I thought she was making fun of us." Liam's response came with the absolute certainty of childhood, before doubt learned to corrupt clarity. She wasn't making fun. She was lonely. The words landed like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples that spread outward, disturbing everything Marcus thought he understood. He replayed the conversation in his mind, the way Caroline's hands had shaken when she asked to join them. The vulnerability in her voice, when she said she had no one to celebrate with, the way she had listened to Liam like every word mattered, like a 7-year-old's stories about classroom hamsters were more important than whatever business deals filled her days. He remembered the way she had broken off the smallest piece of cupcake, like she was afraid of taking too much, like she understood scarcity in a way that didn't match her $800 sweater. He had seen judgment where there had been only loneliness, had seen mockery where there had been only desperation, had projected his own insecurities onto a woman whose only crime was wanting to sit at their table, wanting to be part of something she didn't have. His voice came rough. "I think you're right." Liam frowned, his paper hat still crumpled in his fist. "Then why did she leave?" Marcus felt the weight of that question settle on his shoulders, felt the responsibility for the answer. Because I made her feel bad. The boy's logic was simple, devastating. You should say sorry. Marcus looked toward the front of the restaurant, toward the door Caroline had fled through, knowing she was long gone. I don't think I'll get the chance. The rest of Marcus's shift passed in a mechanical blur, clearing table 6, where a family left half their food untouched. Refilling water glasses at table 9, where the anniversary couple renewed their vows at midnight, with tears and champagne helping James the bartender unclog the beer tap that sprayed foam across his shirt and made him curse in 3 languages. Liam fell asleep in the alcove around 10, his head pillowed on his arms. The cupcake forgotten on the table, because the magic had leaked out of it, because celebration required joy, and joy had evacuated the premises when Caroline did. At 11:45, Ruth told Marcus he could go, that the restaurant would close at midnight, instead of staying open for the late-night crowd because half the staff had called in sick and the remaining servers were exhausted. Marcus carried Liam to the employee area to retrieve their coats, the boy barely stirring his breathing even, and unlabored for once, the asthma quiet tonight. When Marcus returned to the dining room, he stopped. Caroline Fletcher was standing near table 11. Not sitting, just standing there in her coat, her purse clutched in both hands like she had been waiting, like she had come back for something she couldn't leave behind. The restaurant was nearly empty now, just a few stragglers finishing dessert. Vincent packing up his sheet music at the piano, the servers stacking chairs and rolling silverware for tomorrow's brunch service. Marcus approached slowly, Liam heavy in his arms, uncertain what to say, but knowing he needed to say something, because his son was right. Because sorry mattered even when you couldn't undo the damage. His voice came out quieter than intended. Miss Fletcher. She turned. Her eyes were red mascara smudged in a way that suggested she had cried in her car before finding the courage to come back inside. The armor was gone, the CEO polish, the untouchable confidence, the wall of money that separated her from people like him. What remained was just a woman who looked lost. Her words tumbled out, rushed, desperate. I came back to apologize. Marcus shifted. Liam's weight felt his son stir against his shoulder. You don't need to. Caroline's voice cracked. I do. I'm sorry for putting you in that position. I wasn't thinking about how it would look. I was just... She stopped, and Marcus watched her struggle with vulnerability, like it was a language she didn't speak, like honesty required translation from some native tongue of deflection and control. Her voice dropped lower. I saw you with your son, and I wanted to feel that. Just for a minute, I wanted to know what it was like to be part of something. Marcus set Liam down gently in a nearby chair, the boy stirring, but not waking, his glasses askew on his small face. Marcus straightened, met Caroline's eyes across 3 feet of restaurant floor that felt like a canyon. I'm the one who should apologize. I accused you of things that weren't true. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe, that he would offer an apology when she had come prepared to accept all the blame. You were protecting your son. That's not something to apologize for. They stood in silence, the restaurant settling around them like a living thing preparing for sleep. The last customers left, their laughter fading into the street. Vincent closed the piano lid with a soft thump that echoed in the emptying space. Outside, snow had begun to fall, light and delicate, the kind that disappeared the moment it touched the ground, beautiful and temporary, like everything good. Liam woke up, rubbing his eyes with the backs of his hands, and saw Caroline. His face lit up with uncomplicated joy, the kind children feel before they learn to hold grudges or remember slights. You came back. Caroline's smile trembled at the edges. I did. The boy reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the paper party hat, now thoroughly destroyed, torn and wrinkled and held together more by hope than structure. He held it out to her with both hands, an offering, You forgot this. Caroline stared at the hat, her expression unreadable. "I didn't forget. I never had it." Liam's voice came matter-of-fact, explaining something obvious. "I made it for you, so you could be part of our New Year's party." Something broke in Caroline then, not the small crack from earlier, but a complete structural failure, the kind that happens when a building's foundation gives way all at once. She took the hat with shaking hands and put it on her head, the cotton ball hanging limply to one side, the elastic cutting into her chin, and then she cried. Not the careful, controlled tears from the sidewalk, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she had locked away since her grandmother's funeral since she was 14, and learned that grief was something you handled alone, that showing weakness meant inviting exploitation. She covered her face with her hands, ashamed of the rawness of it, ashamed that she was falling apart in front of strangers, ashamed that a paper hat made by a 7-year-old could undo 34 years of carefully constructed defenses. Liam got up and hugged her waist, his small arms barely reaching around her, his gesture instinctive and pure. Marcus stepped forward, awkward but genuine, and put a hand on her shoulder. His touch light, asking permission rather than assuming it. They stood like that for what might have been 30 seconds or 3 minutes. Time losing meaning the way it does in moments of genuine connection. 3 people who barely knew each other, connected by the simplest and most profound of human needs, the need not to be alone, the need to be seen, the need to matter to someone in a way that transcended transaction or obligation. When Caroline's crying subsided to shuddering breaths, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving mascara streaks across her knuckles. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let people in." Marcus's response came from experience rather than philosophy, from years of learning to accept help when pride wanted to refuse it. "None of us really do. We just try." Caroline looked at him, something desperate in her eyes. "Can I tell you something?" Marcus nodded, and Liam stepped back but stayed close, sensing that adult conversation was happening, but important enough that he should witness it. Caroline's voice steadied as she found the words. "I grew up in boarding schools. My parents were always traveling, always busy. I learned early that if I wanted love, I had to earn it straight A's awards success. I've been chasing that my whole life." She paused, gathering courage for the next part. "But tonight, sitting with you both, I realized something." The silence stretched, and Marcus waited, because rushing her would break whatever fragile trust was forming. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You can't earn belonging. It's just given, or it's not." Marcus thought about his own life, Catherine leaving when Liam was 2, unable to handle the stress of a child with chronic health issues, unable to reconcile the reality of motherhood with whatever fantasy she had constructed. He had chosen his son over everything else, had given up the construction job in Seattle that paid $28 an hour, but required travel had learned to budget in ways that would have seemed impossible before Liam was born. But he had never once regretted it, because Liam looked at him like he had hung the moon, because love freely given was worth more than any paycheck. His voice came honest. "You're right. It's not earned. It's just there if you're lucky enough to find it." Caroline straightened, wiping her face one more time, the paper hat still perched on her head like a crown made of hope and construction paper. "I want to do something for you both." Marcus opened his mouth, ready to refuse, but she raised a hand. "Not charity, something that matters." The January cold crept through Portland like an unwelcome guest, bringing rain that turned to sleet and temperatures that made even the homeless shelters fill past capacity. Marcus returned to work on January 2nd, his section reduced because tourist season was over and locals were recovering from holiday spending. Ruth had posted the new schedule 24 hours instead of 32, which meant his bi-weekly paycheck would drop by $160, which meant recalculating the budget spreadsheet he kept in a composition notebook, because his phone couldn't run Excel, and he couldn't afford a computer. On January 7th, Caroline Fletcher walked through the front door of Riverside Bistro at 2 in the afternoon when the lunch rush had ended and the dinner prep was just beginning. She wore jeans Marcus had never seen her in, jeans and a simple gray sweater that probably still cost more than his rent but looked almost normal, almost like something a regular person would wear to run errands or meet friends for coffee. Ruth was at the hostess stand doing inventory, and her eyebrows rose when Caroline approached. Caroline's voice carried a nervousness Marcus wouldn't have thought possible from the woman who negotiated million-dollar deals. "I'd like to speak with Ruth Brennan, please." Ruth set down her clipboard, her expression guarded. "I'm Ruth." What followed was a conversation Marcus overheard in fragments while setting up table 6, piecing together meaning from tone and body language more than actual words. Caroline wanted to work at the restaurant, not as a guest, not as an investor. Actually, work, learn the business from the inside, understand what it took to run a place like this. Ruth's skepticism was visible from across the room. Her arms crossed her head, shaking, but Caroline persisted, with a desperation that felt genuine rather than performative. Ruth's voice carried clearly when she finally responded. "1 week. You do exactly what I say. Dress code black pants, white shirt, non-slip shoes. Show up tomorrow at 2. Caroline's face showed something Marcus had never seen there, gratitude mixed with terror, like someone who had just been offered exactly what they asked for and realized they had no idea what they were doing. She thanked Ruth 3 times, then turned and left, nearly running into the doorframe on her way out. Ruth caught Marcus's eye across the dining room, her expression unreadable, then shrugged and went back to her inventory like nothing extraordinary had just happened. The next afternoon, Caroline arrived at 1:55 in Target black pants that still had the size sticker on the back pocket, a white button-up that she had clearly never ironed before because the collar was wrinkled, and non-slip shoes that squeaked against the floor with every step. Ruth assigned her to shadow Marcus, her voice carrying a warning that he understood, without words. Teach her. Don't coddle her. Don't let her fail. But don't make it easy. Marcus looked at the woman who owned the building they stood in, who could probably buy Riverside Bistro outright, with a month's income, who was asking to learn how to carry plates and take orders. Like the skill mattered, like it was worth her time. His first instinct was to refuse to tell Ruth this was a terrible idea, that mixing their worlds would end badly for everyone. But something in Caroline's face stopped him, the same raw vulnerability he had seen on New Year's Eve. The same desperate need to be part of something larger than herself. His voice came flat, professional. "You ever work in a restaurant before?" Caroline shook her head, and he noticed her hands were trembling slightly. The training was brutal. Marcus showed her how to carry a tray, weight distributed evenly. Core engaged, wrist locked, and watched her drop it twice in the first hour. Plates shattering against the floor, while Caroline apologized profusely, and James the bartender made jokes about rich people playing dress-up that weren't quite mean enough to be cruel but weren't kind either. He taught her how to take orders, write clearly, repeat everything. Back note, allergies and substitutions, and watched her forget which table was which, mixing up the orders so badly that Ruth had to comp an entire meal when an elderly woman with a shellfish allergy received the shrimp pasta meant for table 9. Marcus taught her how to deal with difficult customers. Smile even when they snap their fingers to get your attention. Apologize even when it's not your fault. Remember that tips depend on making people feel good about themselves even when they're behaving badly. He watched a middle-aged man at table 4 treat Caroline like she was stupid for forgetting his extra ranch dressing, watched him speak to her with the kind of condescension wealthy people usually reserved for invisible workers, and saw something shift in her expression. Recognition, maybe, of how she had treated service workers her entire life without thinking about it. After 4 hours, Caroline sat in the alcove where Liam usually waited, the same alcove where they had shared a cupcake on New Year's Eve. She had removed her shoes, and Marcus could see blood seeping through her stockings from blisters. Her face was pale, her hands shaking from exhaustion, her hair falling out of the ponytail she had attempted that morning. Marcus sat across from her, his own shift ended, but not ready to leave yet. "You okay?" Caroline's laugh came bitter. "This is the hardest thing I've ever done." Marcus's response held no sympathy, just observation. "Hardest, you negotiate million-dollar deals." Her voice cracked around the edges. "Those don't require me to smile when someone yells at me for forgetting their extra ranch dressing. Those don't require me to be grateful when someone tips me $3 on a $40 check. Those don't require me to pretend my feet don't hurt so badly I want to cry." Marcus watched her, seeing the CEO veneer dissolving, seeing something more honest underneath "Welcome to service industry." By the third day, Caroline had stopped dropping trays. By the fifth day, she could carry 3 plates at once without trembling. By the 7th day, she had learned the rhythm of the lunch rush, the controlled chaos, the silent communication between kitchen and floor, the way experienced servers moved like dancers who had memorized choreography through repetition rather than instruction. On day 8, which Ruth hadn't authorized but Caroline showed up anyway, an elderly woman at table 3 asked Caroline's name. The woman was a regular Mrs. Kowalski who came every Thursday for the chicken soup that reminded her of her mother's recipe, who always sat in the same booth, who tipped 20%, even when the service was mediocre, because she had worked as a waitress during the Depression and never forgot what it felt like. Kowalski's voice carried the warmth of someone who had lived long enough to recognize kindness when she saw it. "Are you new, dear?" Caroline's response came automatic now, the script she had learned. "Yes, ma'am." "Still learning." The old woman's smile deepened the wrinkles around her eyes. "You're doing wonderful. Your smile makes the food taste better." Caroline felt something break open in her chest. Not the painful breaking from New Year's Eve, but something gentler, like a seed splitting to allow growth. She realized she had never been complimented for being kind, only for being ruthless, for closing deals, for maximizing shareholder value, for doing things that required intelligence and strategy, but not humanity. This stranger's words mattered more than any business award she had received, mattered more than seeing her name in the Portland Tribune, mattered in a way she couldn't articulate, but could feel in every exhausted muscle. During her break on day 9, Caroline sat with Marcus in the alcove. He was eating the staff meal spaghetti with marinara that Rosa made from her grandmother's recipe bread that was half a day old, but still good when toasted. Caroline had packed a salad from home, arugula with balsamic vinaigrette, in a Tupperware container she had purchased specifically for this purpose because she was trying learning, becoming something she didn't have a name for yet. Her voice came thoughtful. "I think I've been optimizing the wrong things." Marcus looked up from his spaghetti waiting. Caroline gestured toward the dining room with her plastic fork. "In business, we measure profit margins, efficiency, ROI. We reduce everything to numbers. But we don't measure this." She paused, searching for words. "The way Mrs. Kowalski lights up when Rosa remembers she likes her tea extra hot. The way Table 6 celebrates their daughter's college acceptance like it's a national holiday. The way you and Liam turn a discount cupcake into something sacred." Marcus set down his fork, giving her his full attention because this felt important, felt like watching someone discover fire or the wheel or whatever fundamental truth had been hiding in plain sight. "That's called community. You can't spreadsheet it." Caroline's eyes met his, something fierce in them now. "But maybe I can protect it." On January 12th, Caroline called a meeting. Not at Riverside Bistro, but in a conference room she rented at the Marriott downtown Neutral Territory. She explained, though Marcus suspected it was because she needed the physical space of business to say what needed saying. The attendees were Ruth Marcus Raymond Torres, who owned the restaurant before selling the building to Fletcher Realty Group, and Derek something Marcus didn't catch the last name, but recognized him as the man who had called the meeting where Fletcher's rent increase was announced. Derek sat at the head of the table like he owned it. Expensive suit and Stanford MBA confidence radiating from every gesture. Caroline sat to his left still in her Target black pants and white shirt from her shift, looking diminished next to his polish. Marcus sat between Ruth and Raymond, feeling out of place in this room where the chairs probably cost more than his monthly income. Caroline's voice started uncertain but gained strength as she spoke. "I'm restructuring Fletcher Realty Group. New mission statement, sustainable community development." Derek's interruption came sharp. "We've discussed this. It's not financially viable." Caroline's hand came up, silencing him with a gesture that carried authority Marcus recognized from New Year's Eve from before he had seen her cry over a paper hat. "Here's what that means for Riverside Bistro. 5-year lease renewal at current rate, locked with no increases. Employee ownership program after 2 years of employment staff earn shares in restaurant profits. Health insurance fund. Fletcher Realty contributes $50,000 annually for comprehensive coverage. Living wage guarantee, $22 per hour minimum for all positions. Capital improvements. I'm investing $200,000 in kitchen upgrades, HVAC system, and accessibility modifications." The silence that followed felt like the moment after lightning strikes, but before thunder arrives, everyone waiting for the impact for the sound that would confirm what they had just witnessed. Raymond Torres's eyes filled with tears, his weathered hands shaking as they gripped the table edge. Ruth sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable except for the slight widening of her eyes. Marcus felt his heart hammering because he was doing math in his head. $22 an hour instead of $16 meant an extra $240 a week, meant health insurance that actually covered things, meant Liam could get the nebulizer that didn't rattle, meant breathing room in a budget that had been suffocating him for 3 years. Derek stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Caroline, you're having a breakdown. This is emotional decision-making, not rational business strategy. If you proceed with this, I'm calling an emergency board meeting. They'll vote you out." Caroline met his eyes without flinching, and Marcus saw the CEO fully present. Now not the broken woman crying in the restaurant, not the struggling waitress learning to carry plates, but the person who had built an empire through sheer will. "Let them try. I own 51% of shares, and I'm done optimizing humanity out of my business model." Derek stared at her for 5 seconds that stretched like hours, then grabbed his briefcase and left the door slamming behind him hard enough to rattle the framed generic art on the walls. The room exhaled collectively, tension draining, but leaving uncertainty in its wake. Raymond's voice came hoarse with emotion. "You're giving me back my restaurant." Caroline shook her head. "I'm making it better. With your expertise, Ruth's management, and staff who actually care because they have stake in the outcome, this place could thrive for another 46 years. Marcus found his voice, though it came out rougher than intended. "Why are you doing this?" Caroline looked at him, then at the table, her fingers tracing patterns on the fake wood surface. "Because a 7-year-old boy taught me that wishes matter. I've spent 34 years wishing for family, for belonging, for something that felt real. Turns out you don't find those things. You build them, with people who show you what love actually looks like." The meeting ended with Raymond crying openly, Ruth making notes about implementation timelines, and Marcus sitting in stunned silence because his life had just fundamentally changed and he didn't know how to process the magnitude of it. Caroline left first, citing another meeting, though Marcus suspected she just needed to escape before anyone could thank her, before gratitude made the moment uncomfortable. Ruth caught Marcus in the parking lot, her voice low. "You know what she just did, right? She just declared war on every business principle that made her successful. Derek's not wrong. The board could come after her. She might lose everything. Marcus looked back at the Marriott at the building where a woman had just upended her entire philosophy because she ate a cupcake with his son. Why would she risk that? Ruth's smile carried sadness and understanding in equal measure. Because loneliness is expensive too. She's just willing to pay a different price now. But Caroline's transformation wasn't smooth or simple, or the kind of redemption arc that happened in movies where montages solved everything. On January 15th, Marcus arrived at work to find an envelope at his station, thick, expensive paper, his name written in feminine handwriting he didn't recognize. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note. For Liam's medical expenses, no strings attached, CF. Marcus stared at the check, feeling rage build in his chest, the same rage from New Year's Eve, but sharper now, more personal, because she should have learned, should have understood that this wasn't what he needed, wasn't what mattered. He found Ruth, showed her the check and note. Ruth's expression went carefully neutral. "What are you going to do?" Marcus grabbed a pen, wrote "void" across the check in letters large enough to be unmistakable, put it back in the envelope, and drove to the address. Printed on the letterhead, Fletcher Realty Group downtown office building, with glass and steel that reflected the gray January sky like a mirror showing the world its own emptiness. The receptionist tried to stop him, but Marcus walked past her, following the signs to the executive suite, ignoring the security guard who called after him but didn't quite commit to physical intervention. He found Caroline's office corner space, panoramic views, furniture that cost more than a year of his salary, and she looked up from her laptop, surprise and something like fear crossing her face. Marcus threw the envelope on her desk. "I don't want your guilt money." Caroline stood, her voice rising to match his. "It's not guilt money, it's help. Your son needs a nebulizer." His interruption came hard. "My son needs a father who isn't your charity case. He needs to see that we can make it on our own, that we have dignity even when we're poor." Caroline's face flushed anger, breaking through her usual control. "Dignity doesn't pay for medicine. Pride doesn't cure asthma." The words hit like punches, but Marcus didn't back down. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't lie awake every night doing math, figuring out how to afford what he needs? But taking your money makes me less of a father, not more." Caroline's voice dropped, became something more dangerous than shouting. "That's your ego talking. That's your pride putting itself ahead of your son's health." Marcus felt the truth of it like a blade between his ribs, felt his certainty waver, because maybe she was right. Maybe he was being stupid. Maybe love meant swallowing pride and taking help when it was offered. But something in him couldn't surrender that easily. "You want to help? Stop trying to fix me. Stop treating my poverty like a problem you can solve with a checkbook." Her response came quieter now, exhausted. "Then tell me what you need. Because I'm trying, and I keep getting it wrong." Marcus picked up the voided check, held it up. "I need you to understand that this," he gestured at the office, at the expensive furniture, at the view, "doesn't give you the right to make decisions about my life. The wage increase, the health insurance, the capital improvements, those help everyone, not just me. They changed the system instead of making me an exception. This check makes me your pet project." Caroline sank back into her chair, and Marcus saw her deflate, saw the fight leave her. "I'm sorry, you're right." He left the envelope on her desk and walked out, his anger still simmering, but mixed now with something else. Respect maybe for the fact that she had listened instead of defending, had admitted fault instead of explaining it away. In the elevator going down, he felt his phone buzz. A text from Ruth. "Whatever you just did, she's crying. Fix it or don't, but make a choice." Marcus stood on the sidewalk outside Fletcher Realty Group. January rain starting to fall, people rushing past with umbrellas and purpose. He had two options: Go back to work and pretend this never happened, or go back upstairs and try to build something real from these messy, complicated interactions that kept exploding and reforming like they were learning a new language neither of them spoke fluently. He went back upstairs. The receptionist didn't try to stop him this time. Caroline's door was closed but not locked. He opened it and found her exactly where he left her, head in her hands, shoulders shaking. His voice came gentler than before. "I shouldn't have said it like that." She looked up, mascara running again, and Marcus thought maybe she cried more in 2 weeks than in the previous 20 years. "You were right, though. I keep trying to write checks because that's all I know how to do." Marcus sat in the chair across from her desk this time, as a guest, rather than an invader. The wage increase, the health insurance, those were good, those were right, because they treat me like an employee who deserves fair compensation, not like a victim who needs rescue. Caroline wiped her eyes with a tissue from the box on her desk. "I don't know how to be normal. I don't know how to care about people without trying to manage them." Marcus leaned back, studying her. "Then learn. The same way you learned to carry a tray without dropping it. Trial and error. Fail until you figure it out." Something shifted in her expression. Determination replacing despair. "Will you keep telling me when I get it wrong?" Marcus nodded. "If you keep listening." They sat in silence for a moment, rain pattering against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city visible below them going about its business, unaware that something fragile and important was forming in this office. Finally, Marcus stood to leave, but Caroline's voice stopped him. Her words came out rushed, like she was afraid of losing courage. "Liam's inhaler, the prescription. How much does it cost each month?" Marcus's instinct was to lie, to say it was manageable, but he had just demanded honesty from her. $60 with insurance, $140 without." Caroline pulled out her phone, typed something, showed him the screen. It was an email to the health insurance fund administrator she had just established. "Priority case web family. Approve nebulizer and all respiratory medications. Zero copay." She looked up at him. "Not a check, not personal. This comes from the fund, available to all employees. You're not special, you're just first because your son's health is urgent." Marcus read the email, read it again, felt something unknot in his chest because this was different. This was help that didn't humiliate. This was the system working, instead of charity filling gaps. "Thank you." Caroline hit send. "Don't thank me. Just keep teaching me how to be human." 3 weeks after the office confrontation, Liam's new nebulizer arrived, a quiet machine that worked efficiently without the rattling that had soundtracked their nights for 2 years. Marcus set it up in their studio apartment, reading the instructions twice to ensure he understood the settings, and watched his son breathe easier that night. The relief was physical, measurable, but it came with complicated weight because accepting help still felt like admitting defeat, even when the help came structured as employee benefits rather than personal charity. He texted Caroline a simple "thank you" at midnight, then deleted it and sent it again, because gratitude shouldn't require courage, but somehow did. Her response came at 12:03, which meant she was awake too, probably working. That's what the fund is for. Nothing more. No fishing for appreciation, no asking how Liam was doing, just acknowledgement and boundaries. Marcus appreciated that more than she probably understood. By February, the changes at Riverside Bistro had become operational reality rather than theoretical promise. The wage increase hit paychecks, and Marcus watched his bi-weekly income jump from $940 to $1,320 before taxes. The difference was staggering. Suddenly, he could buy Liam new shoes when he needed them, instead of when the old ones literally fell apart, could purchase fresh vegetables instead of canned, could put $50 into the savings account that had been empty since Catherine died and left him with funeral costs insurance didn't cover. Ruth implemented the employee ownership program with paperwork that made everyone's eyes glaze over until she translated it into simple terms. Work here for 2 years, start earning profit shares, have actual stake in whether the restaurant succeeded or failed. Rosa cried when she signed her name, her English still imperfect after 12 years in America. But her understanding of what this meant, absolutely clear. James bought champagne cheap stuff from the grocery store, and they toasted in the kitchen after closing paper cups raised to futures that looked different than they had 30 days ago. Caroline still came in 3 times a week, still sat at table 11, still ordered the same meal. But now she also worked shifts Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2 to 6, fitting the restaurant schedule around board meetings and property inspections and whatever else filled her days. She was competent now, no longer dropping things or forgetting orders, moving through the dining room with efficiency that would never match experienced servers but was respectable for someone who had started from zero. Marcus watched her interact with Mrs. Kowalski, saw genuine warmth in the exchange, saw Caroline remember, without being reminded, that the elderly woman liked her tea scalding hot and her soup with extra crackers. He watched her handle a difficult customer at table 7, a businessman who complained that his steak was overcooked when it clearly wasn't, who wanted his meal comped, because that's what entitled people did when they felt like flexing power. Caroline smiled through it, apologized, offered to have the kitchen prepare a replacement, did everything right according to the service industry playbook that prioritized customer satisfaction over truth. But afterward in the kitchen, Marcus saw her hands shaking with suppressed anger, saw her need to punch something or scream or do whatever people did when they had to swallow injustice for the sake of tips. He handed her a towel to dry the dishes she was washing, even though they had a dishwasher giving her something to do with her hands that involved violence against inanimate objects. His voice came low enough that others wouldn't hear. "Gets easier." Caroline's response came through gritted teeth. When? Marcus considered lying, considered offering comfort, but settled on honesty. "It doesn't. You just get better at hiding how much you hate it." She looked at him, then really looked, and something passed between them. Recognition that they were building something here, some kind of friendship, or understanding that didn't fit normal categories, because it was founded on her learning to do his job, while fundamentally changing the conditions under which he did it. The power dynamic was scrambled, inverted, complicated, in ways neither of them could fully articulate, but both felt constantly. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, which Riverside Bistro marked with prix-fixe menus and rose petals scattered on tables and couples holding hands over candlelight, Caroline arrived for her shift and found chaos. Ruth was gone, emergency appendectomy at 3 in the morning, hospital keeping her for observation. The assistant manager had quit the previous week for a job that paid better and offered benefits before the new structure kicked in. The dinner reservation sheet showed 86 covers booked, and they had exactly 3 servers for a night that needed 6. Marcus found Caroline in the break room looking at the schedule with an expression somewhere between panic and determination. "We're understaffed by half. Ruth usually works the floor on nights like this. Someone needs to manage the dining room." Caroline's voice came uncertain. "I've only been doing this 6 weeks. Marcus laid it out plainly because there wasn't time for gentle encouragement. "You know the POS system. You know the menu. You know how to read a table and adjust service accordingly. You've watched Ruth run a floor 24 times. What he didn't say, but they both understood. You own the building. You changed the employment structure. If this night fails, if the restaurant gets overwhelmed and service collapses and customers leave angry, it reflects on everything you're trying to build." Caroline stood up, smoothed her black pants that she now owned 4 pairs of because she was here enough to need rotation. "Okay. Tell me what to do." The next 6 hours were controlled chaos verging on catastrophe. Marcus worked his section plus half of what should have been Ruth's, watching Caroline coordinate 3 servers, plus herself watching her make decisions on the fly about table assignments and timing and how to handle the inevitable problems that arose when a kitchen got slammed. Table 12's appetizers came out wrong. Table 5 complained their water glasses were empty. Table 18's reservation was for 7:30, but they showed up at 7 and wanted to be seated immediately, despite the dining room being full. Caroline handled it sometimes elegantly and sometimes clumsily, but she handled it. Marcus watched her comp Table 12's appetizers without being asked, watched her personally refill Table 5's water while apologizing for the oversight, watched her offer Table 18 complimentary champagne at the bar while they waited and turned potential anger into appreciation. She moved through the dining room like someone conducting an orchestra she barely knew how to read, making it work through determination and willingness to adapt when things went wrong. At 9:15, a man at Table 9, expensive suit, expensive watch date, who looked bored, snapped his fingers at Caroline to get her attention. Marcus saw it happen from across the room, saw Caroline's face go blank in the way servers learned to do when customers treated them like servants instead of people. The man's voice carried, "We've been waiting 20 minutes for dessert. This is unacceptable." Caroline's response came professional smooth. "I apologize, sir. Let me check with the kitchen on the status." She walked away with her head up, but Marcus saw the tension in her shoulders, saw her fighting the urge to tell this man exactly what she thought of people who snapped their fingers for attention, who complained about 20-minute waits on Valentine's Day when the kitchen was handling twice normal volume. She disappeared into the kitchen, returned with 2 desserts, plated beautifully, set them before the man and his date with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The man didn't thank her, didn't acknowledge the effort, just picked up his fork and started eating like she had already ceased to exist. Marcus watched Caroline return to the server station, watched her enter the order into the POS system, watched her face stay neutral until she thought no one was looking, and then he saw it crack not into tears, but into something harder, something angrier, something that looked like understanding. Arriving too late. At 11:45, the last customers left. The dining room was destroyed, napkins on the floor, water rings on every table, candle wax dripped on surfaces that would need scraping. Marcus, Caroline, and the other 2 servers, plus James the bartender, stood amid the wreckage looking at each other with the 1,000-yard stare of people who had survived something difficult. James popped open a bottle of Prosecco that a customer had ordered and never touched, poured it into coffee mugs because the wine glasses were all dirty. To not getting destroyed. They drank, and it tasted like victory, despite being leftover champagne in dirty mugs, despite the cleanup still ahead, despite the exhaustion soaking into bones. Caroline sat on the floor with her back against the bar, shoes kicked off feet, bleeding again through her stockings because she hadn't broken in the new pair properly. Marcus sat next to her, his own feet aching, his back screaming from 6 hours of constant movement. Her voice came quiet. "That man who snapped his fingers at me. I wanted to pour his wine in his lap." Marcus's laugh surprised him. "We all want to do that at least once a shift." Caroline turned to look at him, and her next words came heavy with realization. "This is what you do. Every day. Smile at people who treat you like you're invisible. Thank them for tips that should be minimum decency. Act grateful for the opportunity to serve them." Marcus met her eyes. "Now you understand why the wage increase mattered, why the profit sharing mattered, because at least if we're getting paid fairly and have stake in the outcome, the humiliation comes with compensation that respects the difficulty." Something shifted in Caroline's expression, not just understanding, but fury, the kind that came from experiencing injustice rather than observing it. "I'm raising the minimum to 25. Marcus shook his head. "You already raised it to 22. That's more than fair." Her voice came fierce. "I just spent 6 hours getting treated like I don't matter by people who make in a year what I make in a week. I'm raising it to 25, and anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me personally." James raised his mug from across the room. "I'll drink to that." They finished the bottle, 5 people sitting on the floor of a restaurant at midnight on Valentine's Day, sharing warmth that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with solidarity, the kind that forms when people survive difficulty together and come out the other side changed. March brought rain that turned Portland gray and cold, but inside Riverside Bistro, something was growing. The capital improvements Caroline had funded began new ovens that heated evenly, dishwasher that actually sanitized instead of just spraying water, HVAC system that didn't sound like it was dying every time it cycled on. The construction was disruptive, forcing reduced hours and relocated table sections, but the staff understood it was temporary discomfort for permanent improvement. Liam's 8th birthday came on March 23rd, and Marcus had planned small celebration dinner at home cake from the grocery store presents that were books, because books were cheap at the used bookstore and Liam loved reading. But when he arrived to pick up his son from the after-school program, Caroline was there waiting in her car. Marcus's guard went up immediately. "What are you doing here?" Caroline got out, and her expression showed she knew she was on uncertain ground. "I wanted to ask if I could take Liam to dinner for his birthday. You too, obviously. Not fancy, there's a pizza place he mentioned liking." Marcus's first instinct was to refuse to say they had plans to maintain boundaries between his personal life and whatever complicated relationship he had with this woman, who kept trying to be generous in ways that sometimes helped and sometimes didn't. But Liam had emerged from the building and seen Caroline, and his face lit up with uncomplicated joy. The boy's voice carried across the parking lot. "Caroline, did you come to see my school?" She crouched down to his level when he reached them. "I came to see if you and your dad wanted to get pizza for your birthday." Liam turned to Marcus with hope so naked it hurt. "Can we, Dad?" "Please." Marcus looked at his son, at Caroline, at the choice between pride and making his kid happy, and realized that sometimes love meant swallowing discomfort. "Pizza sounds good." They went to Pizzeria Stella, the place Liam had mentioned once in passing, not fancy but not cheap, either. The kind of middle ground restaurant where families went for celebrations that mattered but didn't break the budget. Caroline insisted on paying despite Marcus's protest, and they compromised on splitting it when the argument started attracting attention from other diners. Liam ordered pepperoni and spent 45 minutes telling Caroline about his school science project on volcanoes, complete with hand gestures and sound effects that made nearby tables smile. Marcus watched his son be fully, completely happy. No worry about money or asthma, or any of the things that shadowed his too serious eyes most days, and felt something complicated happening in his chest. Caroline listened like Liam's volcanic eruption explanations were the most important things she'd heard all week, asked questions that showed she was actually paying attention, laughed at the 8-year-old's jokes that weren't objectively funny, but were delivered with such enthusiasm. They became funny through sheer force of will. When the server brought out a slice of chocolate cake with a candle, something Caroline had clearly arranged in advance, Liam's eyes went wide. The restaurant staff sang "Happy Birthday" off-key, and other diners joined in because that's what people did when they saw a kid celebrating, when joy was infectious enough to cross the boundaries between strangers. Liam closed his eyes, made his wish with the same solemnity he brought to everything important, and blew out the candle. Then he looked at Caroline and Marcus, and his voice came out small but certain. "I wish that we could do this again. All of us together." Marcus felt his throat tighten because his son had wished for family, for the thing Marcus couldn't give him. A mother-siblings, the kind of full household that other kids had. And Caroline's face showed she understood the weight of what Liam had just said. Understood that she was being asked to fill a role she had no right to claim, but also couldn't refuse without hurting this child who had been kind to her when she needed it most. Her voice came gentle. "I'd like that too." They ate cake, and Marcus didn't argue when Caroline insisted on paying the full check this time, because it was Liam's birthday, and birthdays were exceptions to normal rules. In the parking lot saying goodbye, Liam hugged Caroline with the unselfconscious affection of children who hadn't learned yet that adults needed warning before physical contact. She hugged him back, and over his head her eyes met Marcus's with a question she didn't voice. "Is this okay? Am I overstepping?" Marcus nodded just slightly because it was okay, even though it was complicated, even though he didn't know where this was going or what it would become. Even though mixing Caroline's world with theirs felt dangerous in ways he couldn't articulate but sensed like static before lightning. April brought crisis in a form Marcus should have anticipated, but somehow didn't. Liam's asthma controlled for 2 months by the new nebulizer, and better medication flared badly during a spring cold that went from minor to serious in 48 hours. Marcus woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of his son struggling to breathe. Not the mild wheezing that nebulizer treatments fixed, but the kind of respiratory distress that meant emergency room, meant oxygen, meant the terror that lived in every parent's nightmares. He called 911, administered the emergency inhaler, while waiting for the ambulance rode with Liam to the hospital, while paramedics monitored oxygen levels and asked questions. Marcus answered mechanically. Yes, allergies, no medications. Yes, this has happened before. In the ER waiting room at 4 in the morning, he sat alone while doctors worked on his son in a room he couldn't enter, protocol about stability before parents could be present, and the loneliness was crushing. His phone buzzed at 4:20. Ruth. Got your text. Is he okay? Marcus had texted her at 3:30, barely coherent because she was his emergency contact at work, and also because she was the closest thing to family he had in Portland. He responded, "Still waiting." 30 seconds later, his phone rang. Not Ruth Caroline. Her voice came rough with sleep and worry. "Ruth just called me." "Which hospital?" Marcus told her, then added, "You don't need to come. It's 4 in the morning." The line went dead. He assumed she'd taken the hint until she walked through the ER doors 40 minutes later, in sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, hair pulled into a messy bun, face scrubbed clean of makeup, looking more human than he'd ever seen her. She sat next to him without asking permission, and when he didn't tell her to leave, she stayed. Her presence was quiet, undemanding, not trying to fix anything or offer empty reassurances, just sitting there being another person in the waiting room, so he wasn't alone with his terror. At 5:15, a doctor emerged, and Marcus stood so fast he felt dizzy. The doctor's face was professionally neutral, which could mean anything or nothing. The doctor's voice was calm, measured. "He's stable. Oxygen saturation is back to normal. We want to keep him for observation, make sure the breathing stabilizes without support." Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief, and Caroline's hand on his elbow steadied him. Not presumptuous, just practical, one human helping another human who was about to fall. The doctor continued with instructions about follow-up care and prescription adjustments, and Marcus nodded along, but his brain couldn't process details because all that mattered was stable, was normal, was safe. When they let him see Liam, the boy was sleeping oxygen tube in his nose monitors, beeping quiet rhythms that meant his body was working the way it should. Marcus pulled a chair next to the bed and took his son's hand, feeling the small fingers warm and alive, and didn't realize he was crying until Caroline handed him a tissue from the box on the windowsill. She stood in the doorway, not entering the room because that felt like overstepping, and her voice came almost too quiet to hear. "I can go, if you want to be alone." Marcus looked at her, this woman who had driven across town at 4 in the morning, who had sat in an ER waiting room for an hour and a half, just so he wouldn't be by himself, who asked permission before staying or leaving, instead of assuming she had the right to either. His voice came rough. "Stay." Caroline pulled a second chair from the corner, sat on the other side of the room, giving him space, but being present. And they waited together for Liam to wake up. Morning light started filtering through the window, weak April sunshine that made the hospital room look less institutional. Liam stirred around 7, his eyes opening slowly, focusing on Marcus first and relaxing when he saw his father there. The boy's voice came hoarse from the oxygen tube. "Dad." Marcus leaned forward, squeezing his son's hand. "Hey, buddy. You're okay. You're safe." Liam looked around the room, saw the monitors, the IV line, the hospital gown, and his face started to crumple with fear or confusion, or both. Then he saw Caroline sitting across the room, and something in his expression shifted, not relaxing exactly, but becoming less alone, like having two adults present instead of one made the scariness more manageable. His question came small. "Did I scare you?" Marcus felt his heart break because his 8-year-old son was worried about scaring his father instead of being scared himself. "You did. But you're okay now. That's what matters." Liam turned his head to look at Caroline. "Did I scare you too?" Her voice carried weight. Marcus hadn't heard before emotion she usually kept locked down. "You did, but your dad's right, you're okay now." The boy seemed satisfied with that answer, settled back into his pillows and closed his eyes again. Not sleeping, but resting secure in the knowledge that people who cared about him were watching over him. A nurse came in to check vitals, and Marcus asked the question that had been building since the ambulance ride. The bill for all this. The ER, the overnight observation, the medications. How much are we looking at? The nurse's expression went sympathetic. "You'll need to talk to billing, but with insurance it shouldn't be too bad. The new year deductible resets, but emergency services are usually covered at 80%. Marcus did quick math. 20% of an ER visit plus overnight stay was probably $1,500 minimum, maybe more, depending on what tests they'd run and medications they'd administered. He had $800 in savings. The gap was significant, but manageable if he picked up extra shifts if nothing else went wrong, if the universe would just cooperate for once. Caroline stood up. "I need to make a call. I'll be right back." She stepped into the hallway, and Marcus watched through the window as she paced while talking on her phone, her free hand gesturing emphatically in a way that suggested argument or emphasis. She returned 5 minutes later, and her face showed determination mixed with uncertainty about how what she had just done would be received. Her voice came careful. "The hospital bill is handled. The health insurance fund covers all emergency care at 100% with no deductible. It's in the policy I had the administrator write up. I just hadn't communicated it clearly to everyone yet." Marcus stared at her, his exhaustion making it hard to process what she was saying. "That's not standard in any health insurance." Caroline sat back down, meeting his eyes. "It is in the one I designed because I watched you do math just now. I saw your face while you calculated how much this would cost and what you'd have to sacrifice to cover it. Nobody should have to do that math while their kid is in the hospital, so the fund covers it. All of it. For everyone who works at the restaurant." Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to tell her this was too much, wanted to maintain some boundary between accepting help and becoming dependent on her generosity. But his son was in a hospital bed, and the relief of not having to figure out how to pay for his care was too overwhelming to refuse on principle. His voice came out steady, despite the emotion behind it. "Thank you." Caroline shook her head. "Don't thank me. Just keep teaching me how to be better." They stayed until afternoon, until doctors cleared Liam for discharge with prescriptions and instructions and follow-up appointments. Marcus arranged to miss his evening shift. Ruth had texted that she would cover, that he should focus on his son, that work could wait. Caroline drove them home because Marcus was too tired to trust himself behind the wheel, and she helped get Liam settled on the couch with blankets and the TV playing cartoons he was too old for, but still found comforting. At the door, preparing to leave, Caroline paused. "Can I check on him tomorrow? Just a text to make sure he's doing okay?" Marcus nodded, because the request was reasonable, because denying her information about Liam's well-being after she'd sat in a hospital for 6 hours felt wrong. Yeah, that's fine. She left, and Marcus watched through the window as she got in her car and sat there for a minute before driving away. And he wondered what she was thinking, what this had cost her emotionally to involve herself in their crisis, whether she understood that she was becoming part of their lives in ways that couldn't be easily undone. Summer arrived with heat that made the restaurant kitchen unbearable, despite the new HVAC-made servers sweat through their uniforms during lunch shifts made everyone irritable and short-tempered. The profit-sharing program kicked in for employees who had been there over 2 years, and Ruth sat everyone down individually to explain how it worked. Percentage of net profits divided by qualifying employees paid quarterly, not a fortune, but enough to matter. Rosa's first check was $430. She cried in the kitchen, clutching the paper like it was a winning lottery ticket, because $430 meant sending her nephew to school in Mexico City, meant he could afford the uniform and books and fees that would have kept him from attending. Marcus's check was $380 because he had slightly fewer hours, and he put it directly into Liam's college fund, the account he'd opened when his son was born, with aspirations of contributing regularly that had been impossible until now. The money was real, tangible proof that Caroline's restructuring wasn't just theoretical kindness but actual economic change. Staff started caring differently, not just showing up for shifts but actively thinking about how to improve service, suggesting menu changes, reporting maintenance issues before they became problems. The restaurant was becoming something more than a workplace. It was becoming theirs in a way that transformed labor from transaction to investment. Caroline still worked her shifts, still sat at table 11 on off days, but something had shifted in how the staff treated her. She wasn't the boss. Ruth was still the boss, but she also wasn't just another server. She was something new. Something Portland's restaurant scene hadn't seen before, the owner who actually understood what it took to do the work, who had cleaned toilets and carried dishes, and dealt with customers who treated her like she was beneath them. In late July, a food critic from the Portland Tribune came for dinner unannounced, ordered extensively, took notes between courses. The review published 3 days later and praised not just the food, which had always been good, but the atmosphere, the service that felt genuine rather than performed, the sense that people working there actually cared about the experience they were creating. The review mentioned by name the server Caroline, noting that even staff members seemed personally invested in customer satisfaction in a way that was rare. Business increased 20% overnight. The phone rang constantly with reservations. Ruth had to turn people away, something that hadn't happened since the restaurant's early years. The increased revenue meant the quarterly profit-sharing checks would be larger, meant the cycle was reinforcing itself, better pay, and conditions created better service. Better service created more business created more profit to share. But success brought new tensions. In mid-August, Marcus arrived for his shift to find Derek, Caroline's former COO, who had stormed out of the January meeting, sitting at table 11 in expensive suit and expensive disdain, clearly waiting for something or someone. Marcus approached with professional wariness. Derek's voice carried casual cruelty. "Is Caroline working today?" Marcus kept his expression neutral. "She's scheduled for the evening shift." Derek checked his watch, platinum and ostentatious. "Perfect, I'll wait." He ordered the most expensive item on the menu and a bottle of wine that cost more than Marcus made in a day, and Marcus served him with the same courtesy he gave every customer, while wondering what fresh disaster was about to unfold. Caroline arrived at 4, came through the front door in her server uniform, and stopped when she saw Derek sitting at her usual table. Her face went carefully blank. "What are you doing here?" Derek stood, gestured to the chair across from him with mocking gallantry. "Sit, we need to talk." Caroline glanced at Marcus, something asking permission or seeking support in that look, and Marcus gave the smallest nod, whatever this was. She needed to handle it, but he would intervene if necessary. She sat, and Derek slid a folder across the table. His voice carried satisfaction that made Marcus's skin crawl from across the room. Emergency board meeting results. You've been removed as CEO of Fletcher Realty Group effective immediately. The board voted no confidence based on your systematic dismantling of profitable business practices. Caroline opened the folder, scanned the documents inside, and her expression showed she had expected this but hoped it wouldn't happen. I own controlling shares. They can't remove me without my consent. Derek's smile widened. Actually, they can. You transferred 15% to the employee ownership program in January, probably forgot about it while you were playing waitress. That dropped you to 36%. I've been quietly buying up shares from other minority holders for 6 months. I now control 42% plus board majority. You're out. The silence that followed felt like the moment before an avalanche. Everything still balanced, but knowing the collapse was inevitable. Caroline set the folder down, her hand steady despite what this had to cost her. So you came here to gloat. Derek leaned back, and his next words were calculated to wound. I came to offer you a deal. Resign quietly, sell me your remaining shares at fair market value, and I'll let you keep this little charity project. The restaurant gets to maintain its precious living wages and profit sharing and whatever other socialist fantasy you've constructed. But Fletcher Realty Group returns to actual business practices under my leadership. Caroline looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw her calculating, saw her weighing options and consequences, saw her arriving at some decision that made her spine straighten. No. Derek's confidence flickered. No. Her voice came stronger. You can have the CEO position. You can run the company however you want. But I'm not selling my shares, and I'm not resigning from the board. I'll be a minority stakeholder and a persistent pain in your ass every single meeting, questioning every decision-making. You justify every choice that prioritizes profit over people. Derek stood, his facade of civility dropping. You'll regret this. I'll make you regret this. Caroline stood too, and despite being 6 inches shorter, she somehow looked down at him. You already did. When you taught me that success without humanity is just expensive loneliness. Now get out of my restaurant. Derek left without paying for the food or wine, and Marcus watched Caroline stand there processing what had just happened. The loss of the empire she'd built, the company she'd spent 16 years creating, the identity that had defined her since business school. He approached carefully, uncertain whether she wanted comfort or space. His voice came quiet. You okay? Caroline turned to face him, and what Marcus saw in her expression wasn't devastation, but something else, relief maybe, or clarity. I just lost everything I spent half my life building. She paused, looked around the restaurant at the staff setting up for dinner service, at the customers starting to arrive at the space she had transformed from employment into community. And I think I'm okay. Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just stood there being present while she processed whatever complicated emotions were working through her system. Ruth appeared with 2 glasses of wine, the cheap house variety, not the expensive bottle Derek had ordered, and handed them each one. Ruth's voice carried the wisdom of someone who had survived enough disasters to recognize resilience when she saw it, to losing the wrong things and keeping what matters. They drank, and the wine tasted like solidarity, like choosing people over profit, like understanding that some battles were worth losing because the alternatives required surrendering. Pieces of yourself you couldn't afford to sacrifice. December returned with Portland cold that cut through inadequate coats and made homeless people cluster near the heating vents outside buildings. Riverside Bistro, prepared for New Year's Eve exactly 1 year since Marcus and Liam had shared a cupcake in the alcove since Caroline had asked to join them, and everything had changed. The restaurant was fully booked, reservations stretching back weeks. Success that came from word of mouth and reviews, and the kind of organic growth that happened when a place became known for treating both customers and staff with equal dignity. Marcus had requested New Year's Eve off the first time in 4 years he wouldn't be working that shift, and Ruth had approved it without hesitation because profit sharing meant she could hire additional part-timers for high-volume nights without destroying the budget. He planned to take Liam to the waterfront to watch fireworks at midnight, maybe get hot chocolate from the food cart near the bridge, make new traditions that didn't involve service alcoves and discount cupcakes. But on December 30th, Caroline called him, "Can I ask you something? And you can absolutely say no." Marcus waited, curious and cautious. Her voice came uncertain in a way he rarely heard anymore. "Would you and Liam want to have dinner with me tomorrow night? New Year's Eve, not at the restaurant, somewhere else, or I could cook. I've been practicing, and I'm almost competent now." Marcus's first instinct was to say no to protect the boundaries between Caroline's world and theirs, to keep things professional, despite the friendship that had developed through shared crisis and mutual growth. But he remembered Liam's birthday wish, remembered his son asking if they could do it again, and realized that protecting boundaries was sometimes just another word for choosing loneliness. His response came easier than expected. Liam would like that. What time? New Year's Eve arrived, clear and cold, stars visible despite Portland's usual cloud cover, the kind of night that felt specially ordered for celebration. Marcus and Liam took the bus to Caroline's address, not the penthouse downtown, but a smaller apartment in the Pearl District that she'd moved to in August, 2 bedrooms instead of 3, view of the street. Instead of panoramic city vistas rent that was a third of what she'd been paying, because downsizing meant acknowledging she didn't need space designed to impress people who didn't matter. She answered the door in jeans and a sweater that looked worn enough to be comfortable rather than new enough to be showing off, and Liam hugged her immediately because somewhere in the past 11 months she had become a person he trusted, someone who occupied space in his life that mattered. The apartment smelled like something burning, and something else that might be lasagna, or might be catastrophe, hard to tell. Caroline's expression showed embarrassment. "I might have overestimated my cooking ability. The garlic bread is definitely ruined." Marcus walked into the kitchen, assessed the damaged bread that was charcoal lasagna that looked okay, but sauce that had boiled over and created ceramic disaster in the oven, and made an executive decision. "How do you feel about ordering pizza?" Relief flooded her face. "Pizzeria." "Stella." Liam's voice came enthusiastic from the living room where he was examining Caroline's bookshelf. "Yes. Can we get pepperoni again?" They ordered delivery, and while waiting, they played Uno, the game Caroline had learned at Liam's birthday party, and practiced enough that she could now win occasionally instead of losing every round. Liam told stories about 3rd grade with the same enthusiasm he brought to everything, and Caroline listened like an 8-year-old's observations about playground politics were fascinating, like she genuinely cared about who sat with whom at lunch and what that meant for complex 3rd grade social dynamics. Pizza arrived, and they ate at Caroline's table that was too small for 3 people, but they made it work. Knees bumping, reaching across each other for napkins. The kind of casual physical proximity that came from comfort rather than necessity. Marcus watched his son be completely himself, not worried about money or trying to be more mature than his years, just being 8 and happy, and felt something in his chest unknot. At 11:30, Liam started to fade exhaustion, winning over excitement, and Caroline set up a sleeping bag on her couch for him because going home and coming back for midnight would be complicated. The boy fell asleep within minutes, the sleep of children who felt safe, who trusted that the adults around them would handle whatever came next. Marcus and Caroline sat on the floor near the couch, keeping voices low so they wouldn't wake Liam. And the apartment was quiet, except for the distant sounds of the city preparing for midnight. Caroline opened a bottle of champagne, the cheap kind this time, not the expensive variety she would have chosen a year ago, and poured it into coffee mugs because she didn't own proper champagne flutes in her new downsized life. Her voice came reflective. A year ago, I sat alone at table 11, eating salmon I didn't taste and envying a father and son who were celebrating with a discount cupcake. Marcus took a sip, the bubbles sharp against his tongue. A year ago, I threw that cupcake in the trash because I was angry and scared and didn't know how to handle someone wanting to be part of our life. Caroline met his eyes. Was I wrong to want that? Marcus considered the question seriously, weighing honesty against kindness and deciding they were the same thing. No, you were lonely. Liam saw it even if I didn't. You weren't mocking us, you were desperate. She nodded, accepting the assessment. I lost my company because of that desperation. Lost the thing I spent half my life building. Marcus heard the pain in her voice, but also something else. Something that might be peace. Do you regret it? Caroline looked at Liam sleeping on her couch, at Marcus sitting on her floor drinking cheap champagne from a coffee mug at her apartment that was smaller and less impressive but felt more like home than the penthouse ever had. I regret how long it took me to understand what mattered, but no, I don't regret the choices that got me here. The city outside started its countdown, voices from nearby apartments and streets filtering through windows. People marking the moment when one year became another, when arbitrary calendar divisions gave permission for hope and resolution and the fantasy that change was possible just because numbers shifted. Marcus and Caroline stood, walked to her window, watched the skyline light up with fireworks that seemed both distant and immediate. 10, 9, 8. Marcus thought about how much had changed in 12 months, how he could afford new shoes for his son, how Liam's asthma was controlled, how his bank account had money in it instead of just hope, how he'd learned that accepting help didn't mean surrendering dignity, that community could be built even across class divides if people were willing to actually see each other. 3, 2, 1. The city erupted in noise and light, strangers shouting celebration into the winter night, and Marcus turned to say something to Caroline about the year ahead, but she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude maybe, or affection, or something more complicated that neither of them had permission to name yet. Her voice came soft beneath the noise. Thank you for letting me be part of this, part of your family. Marcus heard the word family and realized that's what this had become without him noticing, without permission being explicitly granted. This woman, who had started as a lonely stranger, had become someone his son called when he was excited about a good grade. Someone who knew that Liam liked his sandwiches cut diagonally and his hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. Someone who showed up at hospitals at 4 in the morning because she cared what happened to them. His response came honest. You're not part of our family. You are our family. The words hung between them, heavier than champagne bubbles, more permanent than New Year's resolutions, and Caroline's eyes filled with tears that she didn't try to hide this time, because crying didn't mean weakness anymore, didn't mean failure. It meant feeling things deeply enough that they overflowed, meant being human in all the messy, complicated ways she'd spent 34 years trying to avoid. Behind them, Liam stirred on the couch, woke up enough to register the fireworks and the voices. Did I miss midnight? Marcus crossed to his son, sat on the edge of the couch. Just barely, but you're awake now, that's what matters. Caroline joined them, sitting on the floor near the couch, and Liam's sleepy voice came with the clarity of children who saw truth before adults complicated it. This is better than last year. All of us together is better. Marcus couldn't argue with that assessment because it was objectively true. This year they weren't hiding in a service alcove, weren't celebrating with discount cupcakes and stolen moments, weren't pretending that scarcity could be transformed into abundance through force of will alone. This year they had space and time and food, and each other had chosen to spend this moment together. Not because circumstances forced it, but because they wanted to. Because belonging had become more important than pride, or boundaries, or any of the barriers Marcus had constructed to protect himself from disappointment. He looked at Caroline sitting on her floor in her downsized apartment, having lost the company she built but gained something she'd been searching for her entire life, and thought about how strange transformation was, how you could lose everything that seemed important and discover it had been weighing you down, how you could gain things you didn't know you needed and realize they'd been missing all along. The year turned the calendar reset, and three people who had started as strangers sat together in the aftermath of midnight watching fireworks fade from the sky, knowing that tomorrow would bring ordinary challenges and regular difficulties, but they would face them together, and somehow that made all the difference.